Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Marlo Cohen, and I am a compensation consultant with the Human Resources Division. I'm here with the city. I'm here tonight to introduce Victoria McGrath to you of McGrath Human Resources Group. Her presentation is going to speak to the primary pay plan. The primary pay plan, which applies to unrepresented positions in the city of Lawrence, was last updated in 2015 for 2016 and needs attention. So last year, we determined that the best way to go about updating the plan was to contract with an outside consultant to come in and perform a compensation study on behalf of the city and then provide recommendations regarding the pay structure and related items. McGrath Human Resources Group was selected, and they have been a pleasure to work with. And without further ado, I would like to invite Victoria to come up and speak to you.
I am Dr. Victoria McGrath. I am CEO of McGrath Human Resources Group, and we had the pleasure of coming in and working with the City of Lawrence. Our company has been in existence for 18 and a half years. In fact, May 1st of this year will be our 19th year of business, and we basically serve predominantly the public sector. There's two sides to our organization. One side is McGrath Consulting Group, which is the parent company. We do police, fire, and EMS consulting throughout the country. And then obviously our side is the HR section. And so we do compensation studies, performance management, job descriptions, employee handbooks. We serve a little bit over 350 clients in 35 states within the United States. We have done a lot in the state of Kansas, so we are not new to Kansas in any way, shape, or form. In fact, one of my consultants I got when we were working with a county here in Kansas. So what were the objectives of the study? We were to confirm and clarify the city's pay philosophy, obtain and establish compensation with the external market. This organization has had a focus and continues to have a focus on its comparability with the external. We were asked to look at addressing some pay compression issues, and we'll talk a little bit about what pay compression is and what we found. Provide some recommendations and a cost analysis for a range and position adjustments to the pay plan. So we were not asked to come in and kind of blow up the pay plan and start with something new, but take what you have and see how it can be modified or molded into a different type of format so that we can maintain its external competitiveness. We were kind of added, because as in most compensation studies, they never happen at the right time. And as we started the study, there was consideration of joining your public works and your utilities. And obviously throughout the study, that merge continued and continues to have reorganizations and changes. And so that added a little bit of complexity to the study as we came back on a couple of extra occasions to make sure that we included their information. Before we get into this, I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. What is a classification system? A classification system is basically the hierarchy of job titles within your organization. They're based on the skills, qualification, and educated needed to perform the position. So we concentrate 90% of our time on what is the position. So sometimes I have employees who are at the end of this and we have the rollout and they go, well, wait a second, I think I'm pay graded incorrectly because I have a bachelor's degree. First of all, that's great that you have a bachelor's degree. I think it's well earned and deserved, but is it required for the position? If you were to leave tomorrow, are we going to require that bachelor's degree for a new hire that comes into the organization? So that's what we're always looking at. In addition to that, what a classification system does is it basically assigns the worth of that position. What's the minimum and what's the maximum we are going to pay as an organization for the skills and responsibilities of that position. In some cases, we use a compensation system to outline a career path, a level 1, a level 2, etc. And if we do that, we definitely make sure that there has to be established criteria to move from one level to the next. It can't be just because I think you're ready for it. We want to make sure that there's some objective criteria to move through those systems. So the system then is developed to compensate employees. Once the system is in place, what we need to start looking at as we place positions with that, there needs to be a balance between internal equity, how positions align with each other within the organization, as well as how does it compete with the external market. To conduct this study, we had discussions with city administration and department directors. We have done over 300 and some compensation plans over the last 18 years, but that doesn't mean that we understand the city of Lawrence and its particular positions. So what you may call a laborer here in Public Works may have a very different definition. And when we look to that external market, we want to make sure that we are comparing similar types of positions. So a lot of time was spent with department directors going over their organization, what those positions do, etc. We did review data from the current compensation system and job descriptions and also your current policies. Some employees, in a typical compensation study, when we are going to look at possibly revamping the entire form, we usually have all employees or all positions complete something called a position questionnaire. In this organization, they decided that that was not going to occur during this phase of the compensation plan, but there were some positions that we needed to have employees do that so that we could look at were there actual differences within those positions. A position questionnaire is about 16, 17 pages long, and when it's all said and done, it actually breaks a job into 15 different competencies in which we can compare and contrast internal equity. We did collect data from 16 organizations. Those organizations are listed in the report. Those organizations came from recommendations from the city and working with department heads who knew either A, what their competition were, or had positions of similar nature that we could get some of that external market data for. We collected the minimum, maximum, and the incumbent salary, because one of the things that's very important is to actually compare to what people are actually making in the field, not necessarily just a salary range. The city has more than 206 job titles, but we were able to condense it down to a reasonable survey and get 206 different job titles and received data for 69% of those positions. Once we had the compensation system developed, we then reviewed it with department directors and human resources. We had several meetings on that. In fact, we added 2 additional meetings for the MSO to go over all of their changes. We did work with the city in developing a pay philosophy. The pay philosophy basically says this: we want to attract and retain highly qualified, enthusiastic, productive, and committed employees, recognize the internal work for jobs and pay accordingly, meet competitive pay levels, ensure consistent administration and application of pay policies, and obviously ensure that we do not have any types of discrimination within our pay plan. We did have conversations with administration of whether or not your pay philosophy should be paying something other than the average market rate. Should it be higher than that due to the commitment and services that are provided here with the City of Lawrence? However, based upon return of some of the market data, we decided to keep it at the average pay at this point in time due to fiscal reasons. We're not sure that you could afford moving to a 52nd, 55th, or 60th percentile. Currently, the city has 3 different compensation systems. 2 salary schedules are assigned to the associations, and therefore they have to be negotiated. And then you have one for all of the non-association individuals, in which it's based upon a merit-type system. We do have some issues with the non-association schedule in that the schedules are not consistently updated. There have been times when the city has had fiscal issues that the compensation schedule in and of itself has not continued to move with the external market. Because you have multiple systems, you are experiencing pay inequity. And what we did is we took all 3 of those salary systems and put them together as if they were one, and looked at the distance between superior and subordinate positions, and found in some cases a person moving to a higher level position may actually take a pay cut in order to do that. That's very common to have when you have multiple pay systems, especially when they're associated with union type employees, because you go and you negotiate with IFF, you go and negotiate with the police, and then all of a sudden whatever's left over goes to the non-union, and we never take a step back to kind of look and say, okay, what did we just do based upon all those different types of negotiations. The other issue we have is your merit system. The merit system is not moving people through the salary range. So you have a lot of individuals who have long tenure here within the organization who are at the top, but you are also experiencing a lot of turnover. And those folks that are coming into the organization based upon the merit system are not moving through the range. Again, this is not anybody's doing, this is what happens when you have a merit system, when you have tight fiscal constraints. When we look at the external market to individuals here, what we do is we do something as a comp ratio. A comp ratio of 50% means that you are at market. But what happens if I'm making $24,300 and the average market rate is $25,000? Aha, see, I'm below market and you have to get me up to that $25,000. Instead, what we do in compensation, we say we're going to put a range around that market. And if you're within that range, you're being paid okay. So most organizations do 10% above and below and says, okay, if you're within 40 to 60%, your pay is equitable to the external market. We do look at folks at the lower part of the 40% range, even though you are acceptable. If you don't do something with that salary schedule in a year or two, those folks are going to fall out of the acceptable range into the unacceptable. First thing we looked at was your starting salaries. You have a minimum. And based upon that, you have about 19% of the benchmark positions that are below the market minimum. And that's definitely being seen by human resources and some of your department directors who indicated that they are having problems competing for some positions within the market because the market range has increased and yours has not. As I said before, we look at those within the lower 40%, and you have about 21% of those positions that are in the 40 to 44%, which means they're acceptable right now, but if you don't do something with them, they might fall out. However, 60% of the benchmark positions are within an acceptable range, which means they are your starting salary is pretty competitive with the external market. The next thing we do is this. We look at what does the average person make compared to people here within the organization. And when we do that, you've got 24% that are below the average market rate. Which means that, again, kind of re-emphasizing that people aren't getting to that average market rate through the type of merit system that you have. You've got another 20% that are starting to fall below, but you do have the longer-term tenured employees are definitely at or above the average market. Your salary schedule has a midpoint. In old compensation tradition, the midpoint typically represents the average market rate. What does average market rate mean? It means a person who is fully capable and competent of doing their job, typically seen within 3 to 5 years, should be at that rate. So what we looked at from your employee base is how many folks are below that average market rate. And right now you have about 36% of your midpoints currently for salary ranges are not competing with the average market rate of the industry. There's another 18% that we need to look at, but 64 are okay. So what's this basically telling us? You're still doing okay, but your salary structure is beginning to lose ground with the external market and needs to have some adjustment. Your midpoint is you've got your new employees. A lot of the percentage of individuals that are below your midpoint are newly hired or been hired within the last 5 to 6 years. And therefore, their compensation is not sufficient enough to move them to that average market rate or through that salary schedule. Obviously, talking with department heads, your minimum salary for many positions need to be evaluated. There's some you're going to see there's very little change to it because it's absolutely okay. And so having conversations with human resources, one of the things that they are noticing is that tenure within your organization is declining. People are beginning to move. People are beginning to retire. Some of that's natural. Some of that's being forced because they feel that they can get competitive salaries elsewhere. And it's getting harder to attract folks to your organization. Compression is definitely present, either between the salary structures, but also the fact that you don't have people necessarily moving through the salary ranges and they're sort of kind of colliding up against longer tenured individuals. The non-association salary schedule, what we're recommending is that it looks very similar to what you currently have, except we kind of divided it into quartiles. So there's a minimum, a market rate, which is clearly defined. Then there's a post-market rate and a maximum. The market rate is pushed a little bit closer to the minimum so that organizations that have fiscal constraints, can still have enough money to move those folks closer to the market rate without having to expend a lot more money. We've rearranged the pay grades to alleviate internal compression. One of the things that employees are going to look at is, wait a second, I may not be in the same pay grade as I was before based upon, whatever factors were used in the last compensation system. And so what we tell employees, you can't look at what you used to be with who you used to be. Now this is a whole reset. So we actually looked at what was the external market. We tried to look at some internal comparability with the job descriptions, but external market was the factor. So if external market said, okay, one should be paid higher than the other, then that's what happened in placement of the positions. So there is an emphasis based upon external market in the system, like you've had in the past, but we've tried to introduce and try to do a little bit more emphasis on internal equity as well. The study also provided for some other enhancements. We were able to do some job classifications and responsibilities realignment within departments, so that if there's an IT position in IT, there's an IT position out of IT in a department, how do those compare to one another? We try to have a little bit of a consistent title structure. So if you're a manager, you actually manage people. If you are a coordinator and administrator, you might be managing or coordinating a program, but not have supervisory responsibilities. We tried to identify career progression opportunities when relevant. The concern I have, however, with the city is their past history has shown that if I did receive those things to get to the next level, there usually wasn't money available for that person to move to that next level. And I have a concern over that because you then might be asking people to perform at a level that you're not compensating for. So we only put levels in where we knew that type of promotion could occur, and eliminated those where it was not occurring and made it easier to handle. And obviously, we spent a number of times with the MSO going over to new titles, job realignment, looking at how those positions should be done. And my understanding is since my last visit, I think they have changed some things again. So we'll keep up with that. Policy recommendations, looking for two types of things to be performed on your compensation system. One is you do need to look at that entire salary structure and on an annual basis adjust it based upon some cost of living. The report, I typically recommend a CPIU. It's not as fluctuating. The goal is here, pick some economic indicators that you are comfortable with, use them consistently to try to determine how that salary structure should be adjusted. And then merit increases would occur annually on the same date, sometime around July, and that would be based upon performance. I have recommended in the report that maybe the city consider suspending its merit system for 1 or 2 years. This has nothing to do with the form or the process. We were not asked to look at that, but I think some of the money needs to be concentrated on getting individuals onto the salary schedule and moving them through that salary schedule to start getting them at least to market or above market. And then resume that when merit can be funded, because you have a program that is working. Implementation, when it comes to that, and I will turn some of your questions you have for cost over to the experts to my left, but we place positions within the appropriate pay grade. If an employee is below the minimum of the salary range, we put them at the minimum of the salary range. So they could have been here for 1 day, they could have been here for 15 years. They are placed at the minimum of the salary schedule. We did not look at their tenure within the organization, typically because no one can afford to do that. It's something that you have to look at implementing and phasing in over a couple of years. If they were within the salary range, as far as I was concerned, no adjustment was provided because they were already within the salary structure. The city has already given their 2019 increases, and so that would take care of that. The success of any type of compensation system would be, number one, obviously to implement. In our 18 and a half years of business, we've only had 3 compensation systems that have not been implemented. So hopefully you will not be my 4th. But in addition to that, we have given human resources all of the policies to incorporate into the new system. So they now know how to hire, how to promote, how to transfer, so that there's a consistent methodology in which to do that. You need to perform annual salary schedule adjustments, again, based upon whatever economic indicator you have chosen. And obviously, you need to provide for annual increases for performance, but we need to start implementing that to the base. That's going to help folks move at least to the market rate part of that schedule. And then periodically review with the external market. I say every 3 to 5 years as a benchmark. It's going to be dependent, however, what's going on with the economy. If the economy continues to be as robust as it is, and we start seeing more and more job shortages with less people out in the workforce, you might need to do that study again in a couple years. If it's 2008 and we're having an economic downturn, obviously you can wait a little longer for that until the economy kind of picks up. 2 recommendations that we've had at the end is that sometime in 2019 or 20, the city has what's called a point factor system. That's that position questionnaire that I talked about earlier. That position questionnaire actually assigns positions points. It's an objective way in which to try to classify positions within a pay grade. The system that the city has, they've been trying to make it work over the past several years, but it really is outdated. And we recommend that all positions in the next year fill those out so that we can then input that point factor system into the recommended compensation system. And that gives the city 2 very strong methodologies to use to place a position, an objective point factor, and then the external market. And then with that, you can use that same document to update all job descriptions. The city has done a good job of updating job descriptions as they've gone along, but let's just say during the compensation study, we had a number of departments that were going through reorganizations, and obviously those job descriptions are no longer reflected of the job duties that they had. So with that, I'll stop talking now, and any questions that you might have.